Welcome, everybody, for another meeting of the Revisiting SSI community. So, thank you very much for joining us. While we're waiting for a few more people to arrive, I thought this would maybe be a good opportunity to kind of share and discuss some, things going on, and do they affect our principles? Do they affect our work, etc. And feel free to add some of your own. Um, I think for me, what we were just talking about a second ago is this announcement. So on Friday, the U.S. government basically said, Anthropic, yesterday, the courts said that. Our ban of your use in the government was illegal and removed the ban. Today, we're telling you to turn off your most valuable model. And they did so. Uh, and also in here was they're basically saying, if you want to turn it on, you have to only have US citizens. You can't, and a lot of the top employees at Anthropic are not US citizens. That was kind of the thing that kind of got to me, which is this is yet another slippery slope of kind of like um, the way uh, you know, age identification is being handled now. It becomes yet another thing that, supports, oh, you have to, authenticate you and be fully identifiable and whatever in order to access various websites. That would just basically escalate to other things. Well, here's another one, in order to use this service, you're going to have to present some ID. Besides the fact that in order to turn on this service, they just sort of arbitrarily turned on with no notice a 30-day retention policy on all the data that you use with them so that they can scan it and see if you're doing anything bad. Um, and that was underplayed when Fable came out. And then finally, my kind of thing here was, applying it to self-sovereignty. I've long been writing about, the concept of self-sovereign computing that, at some essential point there are, computing tools that really need to be ours as individuals, not rented to us from Apple and Google, et cetera. Um, and, I've been working actively on a variety of tooling and local LLMs and other stuff to enable that. So I kind of did summarize this. It's in my blog, obviously, but on LinkedIn, it's when intelligence becomes a permission to kind of talk about, hey, you know, what are the challenges here? And I do have colleagues that are very anti-AI and around for ethical reasons and things of that nature. My concern is that clearly AI is going to be in every Apple device in 4 months. I've taken a look at the models that they're using that will be on the iPhone and on the Mac. And so, it will be available to everybody pretty soon. Uh, and we have to figure out, how to not have it be yet another thing we're renting. Um, Before I move on to the another topic, anybody have any comments or thoughts, or did do you care about this topic? Matthew, I see you kind of going, nah, I'm not so sure.
I mean, I care. Like, I got a chance to use Fable for 48 hours or whatever it was available for, you know. I was like, wow, this thing's pretty good. Although first thing I did, I hit one of their cybersecurity walls because I was trying to work on new approaches to AI. And I was trying to research some of that. And it was apparently some of the stuff I was surfacing was dangerously powerful. So I was immediately degraded to, you know, Opus 4.8. Um, Yeah, I mean, I for without getting into tons of detail, for years I've been saying, "Hey, the giant models are cool, but that's not when this all shakes out, that's not what we're going to be turning to for every question we ask, every query, every action we're trying to take." Um, the short version there is, I try to look at nature as a guide on how things are likely to evolve. And when you look at nature, you don't see anything that does everything well.
Yeah,
There's no whales that fly incredibly well,
yeah,
and also rock climb incredibly well, and also transform carbon dioxide into redwood tree incredibly well. Um, and so specialization really is a thing, and different entities being in relationship with one another really is advantageous in a variety of ways instead of some Borg kind of it's one size fits all. And so I see a much richer ecology coming down the line where these things are a part of it and they're an important part and they will continue to play a role, but they're not what we're going to be turning to for every element, not just at the model level, but at the data level. It feels like there's going to be a rich ecology with not everyone having access to all the same data. They don't today, right? Like I'm feeding in my little repo content to a thing. Sometimes I want that to be a model on my local device because I don't want that going to somebody else and becoming part of their training data or other. And um, and so yeah, I'll just leave it there. I think this is obviously this stuff has international, global geopolitical implications. It also has real implications in terms of individuals and sovereignty and community and relationship and trust. So it kind of cuts across all of it.
yeah. Two other data points, a service that allows people to share their, M4 or 5 computers with other people in a, relatively secure way so that you can kind of rent your compute power to others when they need more. Works and is, it's not, there isn't really a marketplace fully yet. But I made a few bucks, renting some compute power one evening. Um, and that's kind of one of my things about, the self-sovereign computing thing is that, we have to be able to form fleets on the digital high seas where we work together. And, I would argue things like, agency law and maritime law, in particular maritime law, where we have to uh, principles of mutual aid, freedom of navigation, and doctrine of the high seas, collective security, unrestricted access, and autonomy on the high seas is a whole nother form of law that and isn't in the 16 principles that we've drafted. How do we mutually support each other and stuff? Um, and then the other one was that Michael was pointing out that AMD has a new $1,500 single board computer that is designed for AI. And although it is, as a third as fast as the NVIDIA one, that's only for input. And I'm actually all the experimental stuff I'm doing with AI is to train it on my stuff. So I'm not just using a standard LLM that you can download from Hugging Face. I'm downloading one of those. I am stripping off the outer layer of it that has a bunch of uh, well, people call it censorship, training in it. Um, yeah, but it's more than just that. So I strip that off, and then I put my own stuff on, which is about how to be careful about privacy and how to do these things that I care about at the highest level. And what's cool about this new device is that once you train these, output actually is as good as one of these I wouldn't call it opus, but it's almost as good as Opus if you've trained it yourself. And you can do this on an M5, which of course, it's a 5 grand computer, but 5 grand computers a few years ago are now $1,000 computers. So, and $1,000 computers are $100 computers. So, yeah. Anybody have other comments about, oh, Otto?
No, I mean, I was watching your thoughts over the weekend over the whole Fable shutdown. I mean, it really caught my eye the post you shared by Ahmad Osman about the
Yeah.
kind of cognition as a service, as infrastructure, and like yeah, in some sense it can even be argued like they're going to try to lock this down just like you would a weapon at Walmart, right? Where you're going to have to have permission and then they're going to gate the access and all that. The other challenge is the more you use them, the smarter they become, and you're just it's like this reinforcing cycle. Kind of reminds me of kind of like the same thing with Google, and you feeding them information into Google Maps, and then therefore Google Maps remains the dominant platform just because they're able to take advantage of stuff. But yeah, I mean that's that challenge with Anthropic and Claude. I feel like they have that they're uniquely positioned to do that because their frontier model is one of the most advanced. I was curious your thoughts on Venice AI from Eric Voorhees, and he's trying to kind of keep all your chat history locally and have a more private inference sort of approach. I don't know if you heard of his stuff or your thoughts on
I mean, I
that.
looked at it briefly. It's very similar to some of the stuff that I'm working on. So, oops, I didn't realize it. I didn't have my video on. Oop, is it not coming up? There we go.
There it is.
Um, it's very similar to the stuff I was doing. I don't know how much. So there's layers in all of this stuff. Um, you can create text tools around an LLM, and then inside of that is your harness. So you can use an app or a CLI, and then there are different versions of those and different framings for that. And then you're touching the LLM itself. And I'm really kind of focused less on those outer two layers, which you can do a lot with, to really focus on, okay, how do we have that, personal LLM that is for you, knows you, and isn't just a collection of your talks and your data on the outside, is actually distilled in the same way LLMs are distilled to train the core of it to put your interest first. Um, More along the trustee line of things than somebody who has access to all your papers, but you kind of have to hope they do the right thing with those papers. And I didn't see evidence when I looked at the surface of his thing that they were doing that. But it could be there.
So, Christopher, the other detour and frolic I want to take is along with what happened with the model over the weekend and the negotiations between the government and Anthropic's folks, the decision in the German courts and the fact that the um, action by the 42 attorney generals has not been released publicly was very interesting. And as you know, I'm working with the Association of Attorney Generals, and they told me that part of the reason it hasn't been released was because of what happened Friday, and it's going to be expanded.
Is it this one or what is the?
This was that the Germans said that the makers of the LLM will be responsible
Yeah.
for how people use it, and the attorney generals uh, all went after exposure of what the builders consider proprietary in terms of internal utilization, marketing, and ultimate capabilities. So they want the back door to all of these to understand what they're capable of.
Yeah.
It's mimicking what the Europeans are doing, which I think is very dangerous.
Yeah. I've seen some other things in this regard. Martina?
Yeah, hi everyone. Happy to be back. Um, Michael, I just out of curiosity, is this referring to that UX that Apple mentioned it won't roll out, how does it call it, Siri AI, I think,
Hmm.
in autumn to the EU?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. I'm not too familiar with it. I just was curious about
Yeah.
the connection.
Some other things that I wanted to share briefly. So, I've been doing self-sovereign identity for a long time. One of the things that I tried to do so at the ID 2020, which was 20 years ago this month, um, not 20, 10 years ago this month in New York City, we had a bunch of refugee service people show up and basically go, we really need self-sovereignty and address a variety of self-sovereignty concerns because of all the cross-border nature of refugees. And they wrote something called the Yoram engagement model, and which was about refugees and stuff. And it's a very interesting document. I think bit dated now, but really kind of goes into the problems of it. I then followed that up with an idea around Mira, which was, a software engineer in Boston who is, a Syrian immigrant and has family at risk and friends at risk at home, even if she's not at risk. So how does she participate in creating software and such? So that ultimately, over a couple of years, became this official draft community group report from the community group that basically, in as much as possible, in a technology-free thing, said here are all the different stages of engagement in a pseudo-anonymous system that would enable her to do what she needs to do. And, there's a whole life cycle engagement model thing that's involved here. Um, and so I basically decided that, let's just go ahead and make this work for real. It is now. So I have a complete, command line and mostly complete web thing on doing more radical SSI with XIDs, which is my kind of DID 3.0. Everything from, not only how to do it technically and making claims. It has a lot more in it about edges, which are about the connections between the nodes, and also things like binding commitments and managing your keys and backing them up and sharing them, etc. And there is a really nice, you know, uh, I don't know quite how to describe this UX, but this is real live things. So if you want to understand what progressive trust is, you can go there. You can actually create a real ZID, put in these values or just use the defaults, or load one that you've already generated previously. And it will basically walk you through, what is the private part, what's the public part, and you can basically verify that it has not just integrity, but provenance, um, and et cetera. So you can actually walk through real data, and in theory, you can do this. I mean, you can do this all offline and then save the results, and you could use it. So I just want to demonstrate that we're trying to figure out how to make some of this stuff real. But this does become, a 15th standard. So I did do a blog post on why are we doing a 15th standard XKCD, if you're familiar with that one. Uh, but part of my
The
concern
one
is,
to unify them all.
yes, yes, yeah. And of course there's, yet another 15th standard, And Linux kernel wants to switch from PGP to the first person framework, which I think is better than PGP, but I still have some concerns that it's a still kind of a DID 1.1 class system.
Christopher, are you intending to be sharing your screen? No,
Yes.
I'm not seeing a screen share.
Oh,
I
okay.
don't believe anybody else might be
I was
either.
going to say the same, yeah.
Um, do you have a domain name for the project with all the ZIDs and edges and binding commitments and all that?
Yeah. Me uh, first, let me turn on. We'll figure out why the share screen failed.
No
Uh,
worries.
that would make it
While
easier.
Christopher's doing that, are any of you all going to be at DICE in Copenhagen by chance? Nope. Okay, just curious. Identity conference next week.
So that's the learning ZIDs, and that is and then I have GitHub. And I also have a bunch of concept papers that talk about, my opinions on what is pseudonymity and what are the challenges and how to think about it. And if you're going to be pseudonymously participating, that means you're revealing stuff about yourself. You have no choice if you're going to participate. Back to the relational SSI and relational identity. An identity by itself is not really an identity. And so how do you create those relationships and how do you do so safely and whatever is all in this document. So I have all of those in the Signal chat, and I will add them to the chat transcript. Um, I hope people know about what's going on in Utah with the state endorsed identity. They passed a law and they've been trying to work with other states. That I've heard rumors to the extent that there may be as many as 18 states that are considering using SEDI rather than or a SEDI-like framework rather than the current um, uh, based on UD wallet MDL driver's license type things. We'll see. But I am quite pleased if you look at it, the actual law, it is has a digital identity Bill of Rights. And individual possesses an individual identity innate to the individual's existence and independent of the state, which identity is fundamental and inalienable. And they have a right to manage and control the digital identity to protect their privacy, and they have a right to choose. Very first two principles, very self-sovereign principles oriented. Um, so it is law. So, one of the things that, I kind of need to do is also look at this and go, where does it fit into the principles? I'm also very um, where's the other one? There's a whole thing on it's not, I don't think it's agent. No, what are they duty. And we have Mike here who is uh why is it not showing the duty section?
I think that's in part 3, Christopher.
Okay.
Anyway, to your point, last time I talked to the Utah privacy officer, he said they had 10 states that are significantly interested, and the issue now is that they want to get states other than in the Western corridor engaged, because right now, if it's just the West, they will announce it in July at the Western Governors Conference. If they can get a couple more states, they will announce it in September at the NGA meetings.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, right now it's red state dominated, but I don't really consider it to be a red state bill. Um, uh,
Now, Delaware's looking at it very closely right now because I've been over to talk to them a couple of times.
Great. So anyhow, if you haven't been aware of it, it's an important one. I'm hoping, still trying to get the people together that will have maybe some draft legislation that we can give to cities, because there seems to be a lot of cities around the world that are concerned about self-sovereignty and it being controlled at the federal level in their countries. And so there seems to be some interest in doing some SSI type things. And I think if we had some, help them with some ideas on enabling legislation that kind of mapped to some of these SEDI ideas might be a useful thing.
And Christopher, the other piece of it, the folks in Utah are now aligning with SEDI is the first step in my fiduciary commons data governance model, and you have the 3 draft bills for that. So
yeah,
I'm happy to put that in the chat. Folks can look at it. Would love to get your feedback.
Yeah, so one of the things that I was just trying to find the actual passage, but one of the things that Utah did that I really appreciate, and I've kind of written about with some law that I helped pass in Wyoming, is saying that the agency law duties do apply, and they also did not. Um, uh, Turn off their own responsibility to those duties. So having things fall under agency law is particularly powerful because it kind of overrides contract law. So when you have something in agency, a duty in agency law under a variety of different ways, even if your contract says something, it does not have legal basis if agency law overcomes it. So I think that's an important part of making a lot of this stuff real in the future is we have to find ways to frame the important things under agency law, at least in those countries where agency law is applicable. I don't quite understand how it works in Switzerland and France, for instance, which have a different law basis, but interesting stuff. And Michael, maybe you quickly introduce yourself because you're one of the leaders in on the agency law side of things.
Sure, certainly. So great to meet you all. My name's Mike Leahy. I have a rather storied background. I have spent lots of time as a serial entrepreneur and in government. Most recently, I was the CIO for the state of Maryland and the president of the National Association of State CIOs. Been in a privacy law practice for a number of years. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the discussion, I'm currently an advisor to the National Association of Attorney Generals, particularly on their use of AI, and am pushing my ideas, as Christopher said, that at least here in the US, there are fiduciary models that are built into our law that we have ignored for a number of reasons, but that I'm trying to bring back to the forefront that address questions about privacy, surveillance, and data utilization. Anything you want to add, Christopher?
Nope, I just feel like it's an important solution space, and I don't quite know how to, make some of it work. But we're beginning to see it happen in so Wyoming. The law there basically is very simple. It just simply says that identity is around principal authority, which is a agency law term, which then allows judges and lawyers and whatever to basically um, assess it. Are there duties under the common principles and things of that nature? That's one of the things that's interesting about agency law is that it um, isn't always there's a term for it, but it can have a lot to do with current best practices as opposed to something that is a statute that is precisely written this way. So it gave Wyoming some opportunity to consider these types of things. Now, the Utah law has more specifics, and Mike has been talking with Delaware and other places about this, and then I've been kind of trying to figure out how to do this at multiple levels of government, not just the federal level. We should move
So
on. Go ahead.
I was just going to ask Mike though if any of this would make him a qualified to be a school board member.
Well, probably not, but somebody seems to know that I was a school board member at one point in time.
I'll talk with you later, Mike.
You bet.
So, moving on to our goal, self-sovereign identity, a revision for the next 10 years. Um, we um, you know, have a new, let me actually, it's this one I want. So these are the original 10 principles. We decided to focus on four of them in the last session, which were portability, interoperability, minimization, and what was the other one? Control, I think. And so these were the originals. These were the red lines for them. Um, and we had a bit of a discussion last time about some of the comments on them. Oh, we also chose these because one, they were a little more objective, but also because they had fewer comments. Um, and we could maybe address them more quickly. And so we walked through some of the comments on each of these, and then we had three volunteers pick up some of them. Lisa and I think this was I'm trying to remember, and this one was autos.
Yeah,
So,
Gerald, the other person.
pardon?
Gerald Glickman was the
Yeah,
other
right.
person.
And to try to look at the comments and whatever. One of the things particular that happened was with Lisa's version on this was sort of separating the principles from the problems to solve from the areas of practice and such. And Also, one of the key questions I asked her to kind of take a look at was, is portability different than interoperability, or are they so tightly intertwined that they should be one or whatever? So, Lisa, do you want to talk us through a little bit of, your background and what you brought to your thoughts here?
Oh, thanks. Yeah. My background is I can't stay away from doing internet protocols and standards and going to the IETF. I tried to for a decade, but I'm back doing that kind of work because even when the whole applications area seemed to become redundant with Web 2.0, I still think there's a growing role for interoperability. Probably just my eternal optimism. Um, I'm now at the data transfer initiative, and so portability is my job, CTO of the DTI. And I did these two drafts without actually considering whether portability and interoperability were the same thing. They could be. I don't really have a big opinion on that. The it's a bigger item if it's combined together because there are different use cases to solve with portability and interoperability. But I'm I'm really on the fence about this because I'm happy to merge them. When we talk to large companies, they're often building separate APIs, one for data exporting for the user and another one for data access for third parties that they exchange data with, and another one for data transfer of account data to when a user's decided to move their account and the company's forced to comply by EU regulations, and a fourth one for personal data donation. And making all of these separate systems and trying to target use cases is not working very well in practice. So we've been advising companies, and some of them are a long way from following our advice, but we're starting to repeat it to say that you should make data access APIs for personal data big enough that strong enough that the user can port their can instruct a third party service to port their data or to have access to their data for value add features. So it shouldn't matter if I'm moving my photos to a different service or if I'm allowing some printer to access my photos so I can print a year's worth of photos in a book. Those should be the same because the big platforms turn out to be bad at over targeting those use cases.
And I think you also said sometimes it ends up with, the only party that can consume it is another associated entity.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so in the original Blue document on portability, we didn't have a whole lot of comments. Or I think, let's see, nope. Um, So in the original version, there's this whole concept of proving an identity's persistence over time is so there is a connection to the persistence principles, in the sense that part of the purpose of portability is to allow people to have something that outlasts a company or closure or whatever. That was one of the comments. Um, and I think you've already addressed, and I think in your thing about the ways with which machines store data is a problem. You were talking about that in your oops, that's not the right one. This one. Huh. Did I lose a window? Huh. Okay, well, I lost a window. 1 second. Um, there we go. So, the anybody else have any other thoughts about portability and interoperability, and how do we move this forward? I know, Mike, you had written in a document on portability, um, that your framework would treat it more as a consequence of the trusteeship model, um, because the information belongs to the commons. Because in a sense, whereas the individual is a trustee. So one of the things that Mike has that I don't think has been broadly accepted, and is there's a lot of discussion in this is also in the lenses or whatever about is identity truly owned by you? And where is, the whole problem of ownership and all of that type of stuff when there is a reality, which is that, when I say give you a negative review on something for your restaurant or something of that nature, that influences identity, but that isn't your statement. It's my statement. So we have a sort of a joint thing going on here. And, his argument is that we are trustees for a lot of these kinds of statements made in a community about things. Is that a fair reflection, Mike?
Yeah, I believe so. I mean, the underlying premise is that, and this is applicable in under U.S. law specifically, is that the courts have argued from the beginning that no one can own facts. And although lots of commercial relationships now talk about owning data, what they really mean, if you look at it, is access or control or certain uses of data. So my point is all data points are facts. No one owns facts, but someone has to be responsible for them. So if we treat them like navigable waters or the air we breathe, they are a commons, and principal responsibility for sensitive and personal information about an individual for the good of society ought to rest with that individual because they have the most interest in it being accurate and timely. And governments have a secondary fiduciary responsibility to all individuals to make sure that the laws recognize and uphold that construction. And if you look at how the Fourth Amendment is built here in the United States, it was preclusion of a thing they called general warrants at the time. And the way we as governments utilize data today fits on all four corners the definition of a general warrant.
Hmm.
And we can talk about how it happened and why, and I go at great lengths to explain that. But if anybody's interested in talking about it, would be very happy to talk to you.
Just
So,
briefly for some of the non-US participants, could you just sketch what the Fourth Amendment says?
Sure. The Fourth Amendment says that without a warrant, no officer of government has any right or ability to surveil or survey or invade your domicile, your papers, things of that sort. And my argument is that extends to our existence in the digital world, and that the reason it has been abandoned is twofold. One, the folks who are building technology, and it's mostly commercial, are not constitutional scholars. So they are building things to a commercial standard rather than a government fiduciary standard. And second, because of the way governments procure things, they're extraordinarily cautious, and they like to only buy things that have been sold in the commercial market for a number of years. So if your universe of potential tools only meets the commercial standard, it's not commercial entity's fault, nor is it the government operator's fault. It's the government lawyer's fault that they don't meet the fiduciary standards that government claim they're already held to.
Interesting.
Great,
Yeah.
thanks a lot.
So,
Michael, one
go ahead.
thing to consider with that is there's a difference between data and a data file.
Absolutely.
And the data exists outside in concept outside of the file, but it's stored within the file. So if you go back to the maritime law concept that we kind of broached a little bit before, you could think of the data file as like the vessel that travels the commons. And it's the person who's in control of the data file, akin to a ship master, that's responsible for keeping it, up and safe and floating, because that person's most interested in making sure that it survives the next hurricane you sail it through.
Yeah, that's very similar, Rich. And the other piece I would add to that is historically, even when we argue that databases constitute property, the argument is that the underlying information uh, belongs to no one, and it is the addition of labor to create that database that creates the capital ownership, if you will. So that aligns very well with what you're saying about maritime law.
So Lisa, any other items in these two, in your changes in these two that you'd like to highlight, or anything about, the this idea around duties and or commons with this? Does it inform anything in your thoughts?
Just rereading it a couple weeks later, I'd certainly hope it goes through another iteration, whether it's me or somebody else. I have no particular sense of ownership over it.
Okay. So one of the things that Lisa did, did sort of divide this into these three categories for both of these principles, which then the other people did. So Otto, you did, I believe you did minimization. Is that correct, or was that
Persistence, yeah.
you did persistence? Okay. So, do you want to say anything about your kind of pass, and once again, problems and practice?
Yeah, I mean, I think I really like the structure from Lisa where we try to keep the principle as concise as possible. And then we get into the nitty-gritty of like, okay, this is what it actually means to implement this, right? So yeah, I try to follow that same structure. Yeah, so like at a high level, try to reinforce the idea that, we want to have systems that um, allow identities to be long-lived, and also allowing for hopefully distribution of the system, right? That it's not like a centralized system, but that it also allows for paradigm rotation of not only cryptographic keys but other forms of credential storage and so on. So trying to put all of that into that principle, and also reinforcing that the right of the individual to not be forgotten shouldn't be infringed by that system being long-lived and allowing that identifier to be long-lived. Then we get into some of the problems, in kind of expanding on paradigm rotation and what that entails, right? Including things like quantum and sort of or like evolution of the different types of cryptography there and so on. Uh, Operator discontinuity, I think, is also important, right? And hopefully with distributed systems, this becomes, kind of a more practical reality, right? So an important point, though, towards the end of it is in the practice is that, you know, as much as we would like for all of these to be kind of a reality, I think it's in the citizenry, uh, the need, the activism to demand that systems like this exist so that our, identities aren't, kind of tied to the survival or a vendor or a government or, any one entity. So that's kind of my take on it. I think it's an aspirational idea, but it is also behooves us to be demanding, us as citizens, that systems like this be developed for us. Yeah.
So, how much did you feel like, I mean, the whole right to be forgotten is in GDPR, and it is only to businesses. It's not, governments are exempt from it. Um, there's a whole element of, well, we can't get people to correct things, but we can force them to forget them, that's going on here. So there's an element of, is it really some kind of weird right to be for a correction? Um, And then there's also the whole side of, a right for forgiveness, which is more of an ethical thing, which is, how long, are we, um, uh, held to our past acts, especially some of the more, the ones that were in a different time and a different culture and whatever. Um, uh, how long are we responsible for that? Forever? Yeah, especially if, someday we live a lot longer too. Uh, did you have any thoughts on that when you were going through this?
I didn't, but I think that's a great point to capture. I don't know if that gets more into like a credential saying something about me that I need to have the right to, you know, request that to have a terminus, to have an ending to it, or if it's just the identifier of it. I mean, my thinking with persistence was more just identity systems as a whole allow me as a citizen to have control over the identifier, and me requesting that identifier to be deleted or forgotten. But I think you might be right that that other angle maybe needs to be permeated in. I don't know if in the development of the right to be forgotten might be pertinent, or even the principle itself. I don't know. Yeah,
Yeah.
but I'm happy to incorporate it into either.
Okay.
I've, I've,
Any other comments from people on persistence?
I've got a thought, and it relates not just to persistence, but also to some of the prior dialogue. By the way, it's nice to meet everyone here. Um,
Why don't you
it's a
introduce
pleasure.
yourself briefly?
My name is Michael Proper, and I've been in the tech world for over 30 years, and in the identity world for over 16, 17 years. And um, I've met some, like I met Mike at the state endorsed digital identity environment. Wonderful, wonderful gentleman, and I love the work that he's doing. Michael Proper, or that top one there, you can find me there. But I've done things like I've probably the original implementation of Carrie. I don't know if you're familiar with that, and worked with Phil Lindley for since 2003 and just been around in Utah for a long time. And when we talk a little bit about some of the integration and some of the rights, I think it breaks into categories, not just a policy standpoint. I mean, we see GDPR and we see HIPAA, Health Information Portability and Privacy Act continually violated from a policy standpoint or from a technical standpoint, which I think is really what the goal for this document is. But from a legal standpoint, kind of like what you were saying earlier, Chris, around how governments can actually get involved and being really influential in this. The state of Utah has done a lot of things historically that have actually enabled portability around identity, and not just with state endorsed digital identity and the Digital Bill of Rights, but primarily around the Digital Choice Act that was passed in 2025. And I believe that it was actually passed partially to accomplish what you have here. And the reason being is you can actually, as an individual, imagine all of us on this call, how many accounts that we actually have that we've got our data inside of someone else's system. Hundreds, right? And so what if we can just click a button and say, from my consent, I want my data back and I want it in this format and by this time frame. And if it's not provided, then these are the consequence. And inside of what you're seeing there, Chris, is basically a $2,000 per instance consequence for each vendor that doesn't send the data back. So the reality is come July 1st, 2026, there's going to be a brutal financial reality for vendors, banks, social platforms, etc., that don't give the individual their data back. Now, the problem is the only one that can create a claim against it is actually the Attorney General within the state of Utah. So you have to be in that jurisdiction. You've got to be protected by it, which I personally believe is the wrong way to do it. And hopefully within this next 12-month period, we can get through the House and the Senate another bill like we did with SB 275, which is basically that digital bill of rights, where an individual can exist cryptographically and then have centralized systems like the state of Utah endorse the individual. But the point is if we were to have not just from a policy standpoint or a technology standpoint, but from a legal standpoint, take this act that you're looking at right here and enable the individual to actually go after, whether in a class action lawsuit or individually, after these claims, I believe that technology would go right back to the individual's world. Like we just say, hey, here's this, like what Lisa was talking about with photos. So here's the storage target. Here's the format that we need it back in. And Google Photos, Apple Photos, I want all of them back by this time frame, or this is the consequence. And I believe that that is when we'll start seeing disruptive. It's the same thing that happened with GDPR. Everybody waited until the end time until they put up on their website, oh, do you consent? And I believe that if we were to not only put the energy and effort that what you've organized here, Chris, into a policy structure, but we actually, and I personally can't stand politics or lobbyists or any of that stuff, but I watched it work here in Utah. And I think Mike on this call, because he's in the legal world, he's in the state world, and he's come out to the Utah world and he really understands not just the things with SEDI and state endorsed digital identity, but I believe he understands Carrie and a lot of the other environments there. And when we talk about interoperability and portability, you know, IIS, WC3, Carry, all of them really use a form of cryptography and identifiers. You know, some are AIDs, some are DIDs, some are et cetera. But I think if we were to align in the policy or at least structure of how a spec gets created to create some form of standard that then we can get things like the Digital Choice Act and the people behind it to actually say, okay, well, what is the standard for portability? So for instance, you know, USB-C, right? You know, that's a good example of a standard that many couldn't agree on, but eventually it took over. And I believe that if the efforts that you've done, Chris, and many others, I mean, I'm still just getting to know people. By the way, it's really nice to meet everybody. If we were able to come up with standards that could align on cryptographic identifiers, I know they're used in lots of different ways, but I really believe that then the policies and the laws could get behind these and we could move forward in a material way where we haven't seen it before. Does this make sense and
Yeah.
resonate with folks?
So Lisa, had you had a chance to see this law, or is your organization familiar with it?
Oh yeah, we're very familiar and supportive of the Utah laws in this area. We think it's a big step forward and a model for other states. And you mentioned standards around some of these for email contacts, calendar, task, personal data. There are existing standards that can be quickly leveraged into a portability standard. So that's in progress. I'm also involved with proposals for portability standards for social media, or at least the activity pub part of social media, and for AI conversations. And we've been approached for standardized, or at least, consistent schemas for AI structured memory.
The area of standards that I would hope for is not just like JPEG and those file structures, but it's more around how DIDs can actually communicate with each other. So how an individual can communicate with a website instead of using a hypertext protocol, HTTP or SSL or even IPX or IP, these old protocols, we use it with cryptography as a standard. So a human to an agent, or a human to a bot, or a human to a site, and it has a form of standardization where let's say that the state of Utah says, you know what, it's not good enough to just verify that you're under or over 18 to jump into pornography, the number one use of the internet. But we actually have to have a cryptographic proof on the social media side. So what you do is you create the law that forces the social platforms to actually say, we've got a cryptographic handoff that we can verify that an individual connected to a site is actually 18 and can enter. Or let's say it's a video game, it's something simple. They can enter with parents' approval, and then they can even spend money with parents' approval, or they can enter into another contact relationship with parents' approval or guardian approval. When that type of communication at the protocol layer happens, I believe that identity can actually be solved with a lot of the, I'm not just talking deep fakes or some of the stuff that's happening and will continue to happen until something like this is deployed. And it's not a technology issue. Most of you already know this. It's really not a tech issue. It's how do we get the policymakers, which is the part that I really dislike of all this, because I mean, I went to this last one that they went SB 275. We had, what's the laugh for? Well, probably because it's real. We went to, there were 75 votes for that bill, and not one was against it. But it took us like five different testimony events to get it pushed through within like a 90-day period, and the whole year prior to that, lobbying to try and get it even written. And I still think it's not even tight enough.
Yeah.
But the point being is, I think that if bodies like this were to have conversations that were aligned around the portability and around the standards and around, everything that you've got here, Chris. I mean, it's really good content here, but there's just so many little islands, and I would have to raise my hand and say I'm just as guilty as everybody else of just going and running. But how can we lock arms and how can we do this together as humanity,
Yeah.
if this makes sense?
Lisa, did you have
Oh, my very fast response to that is ¿por qué no los dos? Wait, think we need that kind of standard and the kind of data schema standards, or at least consistency.
Yeah.
What we're seeing with personal data that's more than just what you could tie to a DID is that people are making it available to AI agents, and it's as much over MCP as over existing data access APIs. And the only thing people are talking about for securing it and providing authorization is OAuth and TLS.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's where my problem is right now is you know, when I weigh it at the high level, yeah, we want to have better identifiers and ability to communicate between identifiers, but the problem is the granularity. So I may wish to share with Lisa some deep context information about some stuff that we have mutual interest on, but it's really hard for me to redact this particular section that maybe has some stuff in it that is associated with my life partner who's a psychotherapist and is very sensitive about her and her patients for both risk reasons, but also professional reasons. And so it's those holes that cause safety problems. And I think the thing that Lisa and I and a few other people that are have been working in this area are realizing is that some of these AI tools, if we have control of them ourselves and we're not, using an Apple model or an Anthropic model or whatever, it allows us to do things uh, where the sharing it can be a lot easier than you might think it is because the AI will translate for us, as long
Yeah,
as
we've
the AI is truly our agent. So as an example, I have a agent persona called chatelaine, which is the medieval term for the woman who kept the keys in your old medieval estate. That's literally what it means. And my chatelaine agent recently, when I was getting ready to post something, said, "Wait a second, you're quoting Victoria, um, and you agreed when you met with Victoria and the other people that this would be a Chatham House rules. Maybe you should contact her first and make sure it's okay." Um, and stuff like that. Now, how, you know, what's really potentially powerful here is that I can give that skill and teach you how to train your own agent to do it yourself, where you can trust that the agent will do the right thing in your interest, as opposed to the interest of, Google or Apple, which might be or some other issuer or whatever, which might be very different. Right now, I can't get any of the standards organizations to kind of talk at that level. It tends to be these big schemas, and Lisa and I have had some different conversations about the pros and cons of schemas. But also, like, there's just a long history and heritage. I mean, Rich, you've probably heard secondhand how hard it's been to get, or Michael, how hard it's been to get some of the carry stuff, rolling. And the same thing with my XID work. Uh,
We've got a referenced installation that we've done for 6 years, almost 7 years now. We actually built phones off of it, so they're called clear phones, and they completely are built from carry from the time you turn it on. They have 16 apps that basically replace all the Apple and Google apps, but it creates a path from Google and Apple into your own apps. These use carry derived keys. So if you do key rotation, you can also take your apps with you, your contacts, your calendar, your messaging, your photos. And that in the jurisdiction of the digital world, which follows the same context that you just mentioned, where it actually knows for you agents that are specifically for you. They're not these rogue things that are in the future. It's literally the individual and then generational type structures. They can actually see, well, was it marked confidential? We'll make sure that that doesn't get included, or we'll make sure that this person only has rights to this for this period of time, and then it can be pulled back. And similarly, like you can do with Google Docs, which I did in a life prior to this, I was in the centralized side of it. That's why I can say that decentralization and DIDs and all of this stuff is absolutely the right direction, is because we help build Google Docs. And it's like with Google Docs, there's certain things that you can expose, there's certain rights that you can have with it. And the reality is I really believe that, again, it's not a technological issue. This is something that if we were to align, and exactly what you were talking about with Carrie, I would say it's one of the most complex things to actually deploy. We had to hire like 3 or 4 PhDs and spend years to just get started. Like, it was very complex, and I feel like we help, by asking the right question. That's one of the reasons that AIs do it the way that they do. But you can help to mature things. And is it going to be final right now? I mean, I don't know if it's fair to even say for folks, but I can tell you that we've been able to build solid systems from phones to servers to communication systems. And I just believe that if SSI, WC3, there's multiple other standards that are out there. If there was portability and unity in the standards, then we could get policies behind it. Like Mike, the legal guy, and I'm assuming it's the same Mike, he understands what I'm talking about from a nightmare legal reality or lobbying reality to try and get laws changed. But I think if we were to align on the policy and on the tech side of it, it would go a lot smoother. And that's all I'm trying to articulate. Does this make sense?
yeah. Otto, you had a comment, and then I was thinking this might be a good point for Martina to chime in.
Yeah. No, I was just to clarify, like, I wasn't laughing at you, Michael. I was laughing at your frustration with
Yeah,
policymakers.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
I
totally.
completely share. I would say part of it is supporting, some of the work that Christopher is doing in highlighting these self-sovereign jurisdictions that are taking shape. Like some of the work that he's going to take to GDC in Geneva in September, like supporting that is one way. Another way is kind of people that favor decentralized identity coming together and showing we can get together. We each have our favorite DID method, just like you have your favorite, baseball team. I love my Blue Jays. I'm sure in Utah you have your favorite baseball team, to put a comparison to carry and so on. But that at the end of the day, like, we all agree that we like baseball. Like, I think that's like the first kind of thing, like just putting that comparison, baseball to SSI. It's like we first have to agree that baseball is cool. And because it lets people own their identity, then we got to get that message out
Well,
there.
if you take that to the next step and you say the rules of baseball is consistent,
Yeah.
then we're talking. Now we can actually move forward. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah. And then yeah, like other things like supporting the effort from the Decentralized Identity Foundation to highlight the more mature DID methods is another thing. And then over time, hopefully, when we go to the W3C, like I'm part of the working group for DIDs, we don't get the message like, oh, there's nothing to standardize because there's no real world adoption, right? And then that conversation is different. No, look at Utah, look at all the other states that are implementing DIDs. That becomes like a different conversation. But yeah, just my 2 cents. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, one of my particular concerns is that um, a lot of this work is happening in a technology community that's assuming that there is no autocracy uh, and misuse, and that I don't think is a valid assumption anymore. And, we don't have the defenses in DIDs directly. I would say carry the same problem. I mean, both of them technically you can latch on some more security, but nobody's doing it. And we got to start doing it soon. So, and that it just doesn't seem to be any like when last time I presented. I had a plenary talk at IETF where it was there were no other sessions scheduled against mine, so in theory everybody could attend, and it was well attended and then my topic was on data minimization, and we should have standards for how to minimize data. And basically pointed to two RFCs that said that data minimization was important for privacy, and another one that said data minimization is important for human rights. And the response from IETF was, um, well, there is no demand for this, so we can't form a working group to try to study what are the best practices and stuff. And I'm like, what?
Where there's mystery, there's margin, and that's why there's not the demand because people that are centralized are all making money on it, and that's
Yeah.
they enslave everybody and control them all.
Yeah. So how do
I
I get, I mean, my revenues are down 90% in the last year and a half. And a lot of it is, things like people are putting money into AI instead, but these are serious problems, and if anything, AI has made them worse.
Mhm.
The ability to do inference on totally unstructured data and derive potentially risky AI, uh, found uh, risky data is really high. uh, it doesn't require an explicit, this schema at this particular data point
But
says they're a Jew. Now I can just basically kind of look at a bunch of your behavioral patterns and have no Jew, no Israel, no concrete specific marks, but just simply because of your social networks, because of your behavioral patterns and different types of things, can say, well, 90% chances you're a Jew, which is exactly what we need to fight and not allow. Um,
I believe that as we were rolling these phones out, one of the things that we bumped into was reputation, and where the individual owns their own reputation, and it really replaces the existing credit systems from Experian, TransUnion, Equifax, and the whole FICO system, and it puts the individual to own it, and then their data becomes private. And what that basically does is it solves what you were just talking about. And I believe that if we literally just understand the connection between the individual and a did and a website and a did. So just imagine that URL turns into a did type language with cryptography, or a bot or an AI with a did. And when I say an agent or a robot, because they're going to actually have robots that have this intelligence, whole nother conversation. So all these different archetypes, that increases the trust, which then will increase the use cases and adoption, which then will actually stifle the folks that actually want to get in and are no good doers because their reputation would actually go down. Not only that, but in the digital world, which is basically something kind of like this conversation where no one owns it, no one controls it, but we all benefit from it and we all have a voice per se, that there's a judiciary system that is actually governed by um, choice. So we can all join a private membership association. It sounds like we have some people in different parts of the world. We can all choose to be a part of it. And it basically enables all of us to communicate. For instance, what governs this call, right? we're on a Chinese data center company, and I don't know if it's recorded or not, and we're all in
Locally.
different parts. We're all in different parts of the world, right? So, but the point is imagine these types of tools that are basically tied into a framework that uses the standards around DIDs. So we can all agree that DIDs, and I think this is Otto's comment, we can agree that the game of baseball is DIDs. But how does a shortstop work versus a second baseman, right? How does I don't even know. I used to when I was a kid, I used to do a lot of games, but I just don't do it anymore. I love identity and this crazy stuff. That's all I really do. So I don't really know all the rules, but the point being is if we can just say that, you know what, first base, second base, third base, and home equals an individual, a browser, an application, and a form of digital intelligence, whether it's in a bot or an agent or AI or agentic or not, the combination of those four archetypes is the basis. And the way to get from batting to first base is you have to have someone that actually has a did. Let's say that's the individual that's batting. And then to get to first base, you've got to be able to have first base receive you through a protocol that DIDs can communicate with. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So
So I,
let's I wanted to introduce Martina. Do you want to say a little bit about yourself? And then I think there are some things relevant around technology paternalism here in this that we should talk about. So Martina, uh, go ahead.
Oh, you put me on the spot here. It's
Thank you.
unexpected. So give me a second. Yeah, my name is Martina. I'm located in Switzerland. I'm currently mainly involved in the decentralized trust graph initiatives and the first person project and network, trying to hold together all the strings because it was mentioned here as well, there is a lot of enthusiasm going on in the field, which is great. But my role as a trust ecosystem architect in the decentralized trust graph is trying to, make sure that everyone at least plays on the same field to kind of take up the sports metaphor. Um, and yeah, Christopher, you showed the website before. I'm also the founder of a company called Cosmo Connect, which provides services with focus on self-sovereign identity. Even though in Switzerland it's kind of a hard thing to do. I think we're not that far yet. The discussions are more about data sovereignty, which is more top-down government perspective than a bottom-up citizen one. And within that context, I wrote a blog post about technology paternalism, which I think very nicely kind of flows into like the self-sovereign identity principles, especially the revisited ones, the new ones. And yeah, what would you like me to tell about, or what
Well, I think our
like to
challenge,
add?
sure. So, part of the reason why I did the self-sovereign identity principles was because in 2015, at the first rebooting Web of Trust, we identified that the identifier was the key architectural solution, right? The decentralized identifier. I didn't know quite how to do it, and we didn't have prototypes for things. They were all napkin sketches, etc. Um, but we knew that that was the place, and um, when we then got invited to participate in ID 2020 6 months later at the United Nations, we were realizing, well, that's all grand and good. We can have a decentralized identifier, and what we're beginning to evolve to be credentials. but we were also kind of going, wow, this still doesn't necessarily prevent abuse. uh, and that you could have just that and it would be insufficient. And that's I started polling around and talking with people about this kind of bigger, issue of, okay, so, we're building this thing that'll work better and it's decentralized and we in theory can build things that are better than the current centralized systems, but we keep on having experience with, I mean, TLS was a distributed system. I mean, the whole, if you go look at the roots of TLS and all the conversations up to when it was finalized in 1999, it was all about keeping Visa, MasterCard, and Microsoft from owning all of the commercial internet. And to do so, we would, set up a distributed system where there could be lots of CAs, and you could choose your CAs, and you could choose what your policies were and which CA you wanted to use only over the next 10 years to have it all be first consolidated. And then the browser companies discover, well, we don't care that you've bought all these CA companies and merged them and whatever and begun to be the rent keepers. Uh, in the bottom end, it's the browser who gets to decide. So we found a new centralization point. Sometimes it's the API key, sometimes it's something else. And so just because we solved, the distributed trust problem with TLS did not mean that it still didn't become centralized. So that's what kind of was one of the origins of, my intent when doing the original self-sovereign identity principles was, somebody's going to figure out how to do this. And we're kind of seeing it now, because if you look at all the first 4 years of discussions of DIDs, mostly in rebooting Web of Trust, I don't think it had moved to the W3C yet. It was all about that everybody was a peer, that there was no trusted position of the issuer, a trusted position of the verifier, trusted position of the holder. That those were all, everybody could be any and all of those, but that's not the way it's worked. What happened is the issuers are deciding who can do what, and then the behind them are all the little trust networks that are forming and saying, well, really, we're going to be the ones who are in charge of who you trust. And we've seen the system. This is why I'm not as involved with DID. The new standard right now is they're just trying to incrementally fix some things. It's the big things that need to be fixed, and this, that's why I did XIDs. Was trying to fix the big thing. I would argue that Carrie also is trying to solve some of the bigger problems. And some of it just comes back to it's how we use these things. And I think what I really admired about Martina's paper was, to a certain extent, even I, by saying these things, am, not necessarily sufficiently arguing about, what is the power asymmetry involved here? How do we manage that? What are the consequences of technology paternalism? What are the different techniques for it, et cetera? And I think this even applies to, this is like Lisa's observation. Oh, well, Google has set it up such a way that the only party who can possibly even accept, the data that they are allowing you to export under their portability is a Google-like entity. So we're just moving it from one duopoly partner to another duopoly partner rather than really dealing with the asymmetry. So, like Martina, I know I threw you on the spot, but does that kind of give you a starting point of talking about our problems or just refer people to read the article?
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm actually working on a follow-up, which should be published like within the next few days, because this article that you're currently showing, it raised quite a lot of discussions. They can, for example, part of them can be found on LinkedIn, which led into other concepts and further ideas. And I'm going to discuss them a little bit, which is interesting because this piece is mainly a synthesis of well, other people who thought about technology paternalism and similar things that I brought together. And the second piece will be more about okay, what are we going to do out of this, and how can we actually use it? Here, I think technology paternalism is an interesting thing that often gets overlooked. I'm not quite sure why, but maybe because the intent is not necessarily, or even in the fewest cases, malicious. So the intent is typically, I care for you. I know what is best for you. So look, this is what you can do, and it's for your own good. Because I think, for example, as a designer, as a builder, as a developer, I know what you need. Let's put it that way. And this is, I think, interesting to tackle because it starts way earlier than most of the challenges that are brought to the table and openly been discussed, or more prominently been discussed. And so, yeah, it was for me interesting to highlight that. And yeah, I mean, the article raises a lot of things also. I mean, there is not just one technology paternalism. You showed it before. There is, like, on the design side, algorithmic side, infrastructure, or one of the most crucial ones is like protective paternalism or technology paternalism, which comes in, I put it a little bit in a provocative way, in disguise of this is for your own good, but on the level that it protects you. For example, there are a lot of discussions about age verification or age gating, as some people refer to it. This is typically not enforced or suggested with a mean intent, but to say, yeah, we are protecting you for all the evil that is out there in the internet. But it can also use the other way around. I mean, for example, there was this discussion about hyperscalers being able, or even have the duty to scan pictures to make sure that, for example, there are no child pornography pictures on someone's account. But this
I've even
can
seen
also be used for other things, and those things are technology paternalistic in that sense.
I've also seen one recently where there, if you take the recent order around Fable and Anthropic to its word, then you have to have an AI client that is monitoring that it's actually Christopher Allen in front of the screen and not somebody that he thumbprinted in who's a Canadian citizen. So you have to have, kind of like the test software is today, where they're making sure there's somebody you are the person the entire time during the 3 hours of the test. And it's like, boy, we're moving down. So it's getting, we were scheduled to go into 11:30. It's 11:30 now. I was, hoping to talk a little bit about, because I mean, I think Utah is an interesting area where, on one hand, they are very frustrated with the paternalism of the federal government. But even then, there is an implicit paternalism within even the SEDI system, which I think is the best one right now. And I'd rather surface the paternalisms and say, yes, these are the paternalisms we have, and we don't know how to, address them, or they're acceptable or whatever, but at least they're on the surface rather than having be hidden underneath. I mean, for instance, I'm all fine for giving a parent the power to say, hey, I don't want my children to see certain kinds of web content, etc. Um, I have a very different opinion about it. when California and Utah and a number of other states say, well, it doesn't matter what the parents said, we're going to basically, you know, just make it so it can't happen at all. I think that's paternalism. Whereas the parent, I think is an acceptable level of paternalism because that, in fact, they are parents. It's the definition of the word.
Yeah,
Lisa,
it's just, and I'm pointing this out a little bit in my second article. It has to be revocable because otherwise it's not done in a good way. So, for example, if the kid turns 18 or whatever age restriction per country is in place, all the power needs to be transferable and transferred actually to the former kid, who then can decide on their own. And if this is not the case, then we have a problem.
well, my father was emancipated at 16 because of family problems and things of that nature. So legally, I don't even know how easy I haven't heard very many people do it in the last couple of decades, but in the late 50s when this happened, it was because, absent father and mother issues and things of that nature. So he became responsible for his own work, and even though he couldn't legally drive trucks. He could drive the truck cabs. And so he could legally get a job that normally wouldn't be able to get until 18 at 16. So he made his living driving the empty truck cabs from state to state, and such. And so there are circumstances where, you know, people, I mean, need to be able to be given, despite whatever the lines are, exceptions, and I don't see that happening. Um, I wanted to close out with final comments, maybe starting alphabetically with Lisa.
I don't have any final comments.
Okay. What would you like to see us do before, would you be up for another little pass through or thinking on yours to or well what would, what's
Yeah,
reasonable, scoped and scalable in your, voluminous free time, which I know you don't have.
yeah. If the framing is acceptable, I could take another pass, like the organization, if that's a pattern that the rest can follow. But I'm also happy to come back to it once other people take a look at the rest of the document. I can come back to interoperability and portability then, and really line those up.
Okay. Well, let's bring that up in chat. Otto, I'm going to jump to you. You were the other. What do you think as far as your section and what are next steps? And
Yeah, I mean, I'll add the feedback around the right to be forgotten, with your particular example on, I guess, also the credentials that might need to have an expiry date because you put the example of like sins to be forgiven or societal kind of limits to these sorts of things. So I'll incorporate that. But yeah, if anybody else has any comments, like the Google Docs open for comments, so if anybody wants to chime in, I'll be happy to consider those as well. Yeah, absolutely.
so we never really got to transparency and protection. I don't know if we have a volunteer for doing what Lisa and Otto have done for one of those two sections. I think Martina, you were specifically interested in either the coercion 16, or it could be argued as number two. I'm not sure. The um, uh, So, whether or not
It's
it's
16.
inalienability or it's the 16. Okay, yeah. So to do maybe the same kind of thing for that. Um,
Yep,
uh,
happy to do that.
and Rich,
It
any
fits.
final comments?
Yeah, I've been lurking a lot. I apologize. The final thought would be that there was been a couple times that the discussion has come around to whether or not you're talking about data sovereignty or or identity sovereignty. And I would just throw out that I don't know if that's if you can have one without the other going from either side. I don't think it's possible to have data um, sovereignty if you don't have identity sovereignty and vice versa. So I don't think the two work against each other. I think the two are inextricably combined. And I put
Yeah,
out
maybe,
a couple LinkedIn things. I didn't want to use one of my 3 or 4 free free freebies where I throw notes in. So if the folks who got those would just accept them, I sure would appreciate it because both of you I want to talk to a lot more.
okay. If you're up for tackling one of these, the number 6 on access might be an interesting one. It doesn't have a whole lot of comments in the Google Doc.
I'll take it.
That'd be great.
Okay.
Thank you much, everybody. And I'm thinking like the Wednesday after the 4th of July. Let me figure out when that is as a potential other date. I know it's kind of hard um, with holidays and things of that nature. So that would be the 8th of yeah, the 8th of July. Is that something that would be of interest to people to have another meeting?
Yep.
Okay, at least I see nods from everybody. Uh, so thank you very much again, and I'll be, putting up a transcript and a summary again later tonight.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Ciao.
Thank you. Bye.